Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CFO Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we will turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsors, Rimini Street, Vertex, and Lease Accelerator. Our sponsors are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag Argyle Digital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also, be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I would like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we have curated based on the feedback we have received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. Now, let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dolores Lindsay-Jones, CFO Partner, Eliason Group. We are excited to have Dolores with us for our opening keynote presentation titled The Role of the CFO in Changing Times. Welcome, Dolores. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to discuss the role of the CFO in changing times. The objectives for today includes highlighting the current CFO landscape, which I'm sure you're intimately familiar with, determining key changes for the evolving CFO, next, implementing practical solutions in these changing times, and how do we prepare for the future? So let's get started. When we think about the CFO landscape, we think about some key concepts. For example, new value. And by that, you might ask, what do you mean by new value? And that's enterprise value. We're no longer number crunches any longer. It's not about the earnings per share or financial metrics. Those are the baseline ticket to entry. Now we have to provide value to the enterprise, and that entails looking at how you can support the business to grow and thrive in these very changing times. Another aspect of the CFO landscape is what I like to call the technology revolution. Some think of it as the fourth industrial revolution. According to Gartner, 82% of CFOs are investing in some form of digital, over talent, over supply chain, over fixed assets. And you take a minute for that just to sink in. That is a key delineator for the success of the enterprise and how the CFO supports. Another key aspect of the CFO landscape is agility. And when you think about what's going on in the financial world, it's a multiplicity of things interacting at the same time. For example, cybersecurity, key. We've seen a number of breaches in the key focus on cybersecurity. Data privacy. If we have a cybersecurity breach, it could open us up to liability associated with any customer data, because that's the basis for identity theft and other nefarious items. Another thing that we think about in terms of agility is our changing times. Global warming is another aspect. We've seen increased number of hurricanes, fires, earthquakes, and these don't happen in isolation. They happen to people that we manage. So we have to be able to deal with those situations. And I'm sure everyone is intimately familiar with the COVID threat. And while we don't have people dying from COVID necessarily in large rates as we did at the beginning, it's still a threat, because when people are out or they infect the office, you have to have processes and protocols in place for that. So those are just a few of the things that help us think about how to be agile in these times. Another CFO landscape focus is new skills. Gone are the days of the finance function operating in isolation. We really are integrated from a CFO standpoint from HR, IT, and finance. So we definitely have to continue to refine our skills, especially in the digital area. And then finally, there's evolving expectations, not only from the CEO, but from business partners. They want you to be able to help them drive their business. Now, for example, data visualization is a key aspect of getting real-time data where you can drive business insights and not just number crunching and saying, here's still data, but what does that data tell you for the future? So we see that changing pretty rapidly. Let's move on to the next slide. This is my slide in terms of some of the key things that I think that we need to think about as an evolving CFO. The agility, as I mentioned previously, being strategic and using critical thinking to address issues within the business, and also using analytics as an aspect of looking at the big picture, and also being creative, especially creative with regard to driving value. So let's look at a few components of what I see as some of the evolving aspects of the new CFO. Forward-looking, forward-thinking. So we're looking at where the puck is going, not where the puck is. And we need good analytical tools in order to do that. I'm a big proponent of data visualization, whichever vendor you may choose, but it's a really key element of really understanding analytics and how you turn the analytics into key business insights. And if anyone hasn't heard of machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, analytics, you're probably not in this world. I think that deep business insights are key. Those are some tools that you can use in order to help transform your business. And I'm a huge proponent of looking at all aspects of those forms of deep business insights. One of the key things that I have encountered as being CFO for a few businesses is how we're engaging multiple generations in the workforce. For example, at CPS Energy, where I was CFO and treasurer, they had identified that 25 to 30% of our workforce would retire by 2025. And we're almost there. So you see the baby boomers really dropping off. And then we have the other generations, Generation Xers, Yers, coming into the workforce. And they are motivated and they work differently from baby boomers, as an example. One example I would share with you, I hired a director, and this took a 6-month search with 2 executive recruiting firms. And the person worked for me for a month. And they said, I really don't like what I'm doing, so I'm just going to quit. And so think about the impact to my business, my team, my organization as a result. So people are thinking differently. In fact, one of the executive recruiters said it was a very commonplace thing for someone to accept an offer and just no show. Don't call, don't email, don't say I'm not coming, just don't show up. So those are the types of things that we're dealing with as evolving CFOs. Also, as I mentioned, cybersecurity, privacy are huge issues that we have to address. We need to make sure that we have the right protocols in place, documented procedures, so people know how to address cybersecurity and privacy threats. I am a member of the local CFO Leadership Council, and we recently had a survey of what issues are affecting most CFOs. And the number one issue was working from home. And some of the issues that were discussed was how do you make sure that folks that are working from home are getting the work done? Also addressing working from home 100% a hybrid, and how when people have become accustomed to working from home 100%, how do you get them back to the office? So these are real issues, and that was the hottest topic at our CFO Leadership Council on that day. Next, one of the key things, especially tied into working from home or having hybrid work environments, is communication. And there is no replication for in-person communication, but there are some avenues by which you can promote good communication through Teams meetings, through Slack, through Microsoft Teams, those types of communications on a regular basis, even doing fun activities through those communication tools is helpful. One of the things that I hire for when I'm hiring folks to work for me is EQ. And that's one of the key, I would say, new skills that you would see in finance, is the ability to read the room, the ability to understand when to interject or when to say key elements of whatever that topic is. And I would say of utmost importance is financial storytelling. Telling someone that your expenses increased 10% or decreased, that's of absolute no value, in my opinion. You have to tell the business leader why these changes are happening and what are you going to do about them, and what changes are you going to make. So ultimately, all those things play together to promote effective CFO leader. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you want a high-performing team so that when you are interacting with your business leaders, interacting with your team, that you're driving the right business results and driving profitability for your business. Let's move on to the next slide. I want to share with you some examples that I've encountered throughout my career in terms of cloud adoption. I was very fortunate to work at Microsoft at the time that the cloud was being adopted, and it was pretty scary about back then, because people were very leery of what was going to happen to their data once it was in the cloud. And now cloud is so common, with our phones, with our computers, with systems. And if you're not at some form of cloud adoption, you're behind. And I encourage anyone who hasn't at some level done some level of automation, then I would encourage you to do so. I mentioned earlier machine learning. When I was at Microsoft, I also worked with data scientists to see if they could come up with a more precise forecast than my own. And they actually were within 0.1% accuracy. So these tools are very effective, and you have to use them certainly within moderation, because there are some things you just have to provide human input to, but it's something to consider. Another example I'll share with you, at CPS Energy, when I went there, we had a huge AR and AP team, and mainly because there was a lot of duplication, lots of touches to one invoice, as an example. And I used a platform to use robotics process automation, and I was able to cut out 2 weeks of cycle time for invoice processing, which was huge. And I used that savings of time to redeploy those resources in other areas of the business where I needed folks. And then finally, big data is also very insightful. I'm sure many years ago, you would see a meter reader come to your home and come out and write your meter usage. Gone are those days. They have meters that transmit thousands of bits of data per minute, so that you know when peak electricity usage happens. Also, in preparing for rate cases, I could tell where I could propose rate increases because of all this analytics, and it's so much data. And when you use systems to capture that data and turn it into insight is what makes it very useful. So that brings me to my last slide, which is some key things for consideration as the new role of the CFO. As I said previously, the new CFO has to have critical thinking and have to be a thought leader and think big picture ultimately, but also they need to understand how the business works and the interactions of their role to the business leaders, to their teams, and other key stakeholders. Also, the new CFO has to be a strong people leader. And being a strong people leader is different now from the standpoint that there are still a number of teams that are working 100% from home. Now we see hybrid teams, and then some teams are 100% in the office. I would think that would be the smaller category. But how do you lead in those different work environments and keep people engaged and motivated and excited to do their best work? Another aspect of being a strong people leader also is developing that team, whether that team is remote or not. So those are some considerations as well. The new role of the CFO, they're a key decision maker. Previously, we would see decision makers primarily at the top, the CEO of the organization, but many decisions are currently made within the CFO office, and therefore we have to be very cognizant of all aspects of what drives decision and what makes great decision making. And finally, I would say the key role of the CFO is really contemplating other aspects of that role. For example, IT is sometimes categorized in the area for digital transformation. And so historically, IT would have been separated and off to the side, whereas now, in order to have digital visualization or other digital tools, you have to think about that and you have to make decisions about it and potentially bring those softwares or ERPs into your organization. Similarly, HR used to be a separate function, and now a lot of the things that impact our business, like working from home, it's really under the HR umbrella, but topics that we as CFOs have to deal with. So in conclusion, I think it's key to be transparent with your teams, transparent with your leaders, and also be cognizant of all key topics impacting your function. Because ultimately, I think that the new CFO that's successful will be doing all of these things. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Here's a question, Dolores. How do CFOs keep their finance teams encouraged despite working remotely?
I think one of the key things of keeping team members encouraged and motivated is communication. And I think especially in a hybrid or 100% work from home situation, you have to let people know what's going on. This is what I tell my teams. If you don't tell me what's going on, I'm going to make up stories in my own head of what's going on. So people do that. So you have to make sure that even if you don't know anything, you tell them, I don't know anything about this topic, but as soon as I do know, I will let you know. And then two, invest in people. Career development doesn't go away in a remote environment. You still need to make sure people get trained, they get the leadership development that they need. And when a team member knows that you're invested in them, they will invest in you and they will invest in the company.
Okay, great. Here's a question, an interesting one from the audience. How does one become a good storyteller? Classes, what type?
Well, I'll tell you my journey. I don't want to say that I'm the greatest storyteller, but I think I'm reasonably good. One of the things that I did very early on in my career is I attended Toastmasters, which is a speaking group, and they help you practice your speaking skills. There's all types of presentations that they will allow you to do that helps drive your speaking ability. But one of the key things I think that's most effective in storytelling is personalizing your story. Like you think about your professors in college. The ones that were most interesting to me is ones who had actually done what I planned to do in life and they could share stories. And I think for me personally, the key for storytelling is really understanding your audience. Like, what do you want them to know? To be very immersed in the story, the detail, the data, so that when you're telling the story, it's believable. And then I would say another aspect of storytelling is really being conversational, because sometimes when you're too rigid in presentations, it's a turnoff for folks. So I would say those things. There's also Dale Carnegie speaking groups as well that helps with public speaking. It helps you to learn how to financially tell stories.
Great. And what are you seeing in the CFO succession planning arena?
The CFO succession and planning arena, that's kind of a broad question. Do you have any more specifics?
No, unfortunately, that it is a pretty broad topic.
Well, I think that in any succession plan, you have to have people identified based on their skill set, their ability, their people management skill, their leadership skills, and it needs to be thought through and documented for the future. That's all I have for that very general question.
Okay, great. Here's another one. What trends do you see evolving in the C-suite succession planning arena?
I think that just like I highlighted in my presentation, the CFO role is totally different today than it was a year ago, than it was 5 years ago. And as things change in the financial world, we'll have to evolve as CFOs. In terms of succession, when we think about the generational differences, as an example, as we bring in generation Xers and Yers and Zers, they think differently. They operate differently. And so I think that it has to be on organization by organizational basis, even a team by team basis in terms of CFO succession. But we have to document it. Like, for example, at Dell Technologies, we would identify our successors for our roles, and then we would have the discussions with our CFO, and then in concert with that, we would go to the person that we identified as our successor and say, do you think you could be my successor, and what skills do you need to make sure you get there? So I think it has to be a thoughtful process and an interactive one as well.
Great. And here's another question. Are you seeing any pushback from employees as more businesses are moving to in-person requirements?
Absolutely. I confer with colleagues all the time, and at that CFO Leadership Council meeting that I attended, where working from home was the hottest topic, some of the leaders were highlighting that some of their team members, they just don't want to go back. It's very comfortable being at home because you could be very casual. You can do stuff at home on your breaks. Sometimes people do things not on their breaks, but it's very comfortable. And some of my colleagues are taking a hard line, saying basically you come back to the office or you don't have a job. And then some of my colleagues are saying that what can we do to make the transition easier? And they're doing things to facilitate the transition back to the office.
Great. And here's another related question. How do you keep your teams engaged and make them feel appreciated?
There is so many ways you can do that, but I think the key thing in making sure your teams feel appreciated is first understanding what's important to them. What do they value? And one team member may value public recognition, like a CFO award. Another person may not care about that. They may value getting a dinner certificate to their favorite restaurant. Someone else may want a Visa gift card, or another person may just want you to personally tell them or write a handwritten note. And that's one of the things I try to do reasonably often, is when someone does something, write a handwritten note. In a work from home environment, that's a little difficult, right? In terms of having the impact on a real-time basis. But you can also send a Slack note or whatever to highlight what's important to a person, or make them feel like you value them. I think that's key. I've been known for driving high-performing teams, and one of the key aspects I believe in having a high-performing team is making sure that that individual knows that you care about them first as a person. And if they feel that you care about them, they will give 1000% to you and the organization. So I think that's one aspect as well.
Great. Well, thank you again, Dolores, for an excellent keynote. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.